I talk for a second?
Excursion into
Coaching.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our very eclectic kind of session that we're going to be having here today. So we're really excited to have you. I'm Lauren Thompson. I'm the chairperson from this room and also one of the speakers to talk about teacher resilience after Yannick Jacob. So we're going to turn the floor over to him, and please enjoy.
Cool. Well, hello. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you here. First of all, feel free to take pictures. I do have a download link for the slides later on, so you don't have to, but I will post for you if you do. So, psychedelics, nothing in the water, no free samples, first of all. Everybody might go then. I know, you can leave now if you want. Well, here's a quote. In 1975, Stanislav Grof, who's known as the founding father for transpersonal psychology, wrote in his book, Realms of Human Unconscious, that the potential of LSD for psychiatry and psychology is comparable to the importance of the microscope for biology and the telescope to astronomy. Because the microscope revealed the microworld, the telescope revealed the depth of the universe, and LSD in this particular, because he's a forefather of psychedelics-assisted psychotherapy as well, really allows us to observe things that previously we're not able to observe. So I read that. This is usually the quote that's, it was quite difficult to find the reference actually, but this is usually what pops up everywhere. So I read that and I thought, huh. So in 2016 I did something that blew my mind. I read this study. And it was quite mind-blowing, I'm not going to lie. So what they found is that psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, psychedelics has a lot of the range of psychedelics, the classical psychedelics, magic mushrooms, psilocybin, LSD, DMT, there's a couple of them. That's what's mostly been researched. So in this study, psilocybin produced large and significant decreases in depression, anxiety, and mood disturbance. And those effects were sustained at 6 months. And large is really large. There's a lot of people that were depression-free for the first time in decades, for 6 months. And these are the treatment-resistant types of clinical depression. So that is quite mind-blowing. The FDA has now, the Food and Drug Administration in the US has now assigned breakthrough designation for MDMA therapy for PTSD and psilocybin for the treatment of depression. And it's really difficult to get something through the FDA's net. Rick Doblin, the founder of MAPS, has literally spent 30 years to do it. His dissertation is a stack of paper figuring out how to get through the process of FDA to get this approved. But it is mind-blowing what happens in therapeutic applications. There's a bunch of other findings in the last 20 years. Research has been dead since Timothy Leary broke away from Harvard and became enemy number one in the US Nixon administration. And all the research has been banned for 40 years. So it's been really difficult. Griffiths, early 2000s, has initiated a renaissance in the research. So this has come out of it. So anxiety disorders, substance use disorders, death acceptance. They had stage 3 cancer, not survivors, but like facing death. Very much the opposite of survivors. Facing death, you're definitely going to die. Coming to accept that they are going to die, with a sense as much peaceful as that can get. And this is after one session, combined with a bit of therapy. So that is, in terms of clinical research, my God. So my positive psychology and my coaching brain kicked in, and I thought, well, what's beyond healing? Because if it's so effective, more research to be done, absolutely. But if it's that effective in healing and treating disorder and disease, what about all the people that don't qualify for clinical disorders? What about people who are relatively resourced? and they want to expand, they want to learn, they want to grow, they want to gain some insight, they want to transcend, find meaning, purpose. So that quote from earlier had something in the middle, which means, and they also measured increases in measures of quality of life, meaning, death acceptance, and optimism. So Griffiths is actually one of the few who really initiated a lot of research into well-being, spirituality, secular spirituality. So there's some good research coming up, but nothing has really looked into coaching. So this is from quite early, 2006. So this is one of the first studies into it. The participants in this study were people without clinical conditions, no diagnoses, just relatively clinically healthy participants who had not had any experiences with psychedelics in any way. And he wrote that it is remarkable that 67% of volunteers to take part in the study rated this experience, the single one experience, as either the most meaningful experience of their life or among the 5 most meaningful experiences of their lives. Here's that data. So that's 2/3 who had an experience, and these experiences were rated among the death of a parent or the birth of a child, getting married, you name it. So another mind-blowing piece of information that made me go, ooh. This is a brain scan for cerebral blood flow. So you can see that on LSD, blood flow is significantly increased. I won't get more into that study. Here's a map, a simplified map of the community structure of persistence homological scaffolding. The connections in the brain, they're immensely more numerous. So you can think about this as shaking the snow globe of your brain, so that all these old patterns that you tend to slip into get completely eradicated for the time of the experience. And you can think in absolutely novel ways, which can be mind-boggling and bogus, and it just doesn't make any sense at all. But also, you might break through some limiting beliefs or limiting ways of thinking and make completely new connections. So you can imagine the implications for creativity, for learning, for innovation. Then one study that made a huge difference to my professional stance towards this is a critical analysis or critical review of the literature, drawing out positive psychological themes from existing research into clinical populations. So I won't get much into the results, but combined, we have a 6-page table with references. Here are some of the aspects that have been positively affected by various psilocybins. So we don't quite have time to go into the data, but there's a lot in there. So as positive psychologists, or people with an interest in positive psychology, a positive psychology lens, if you will recognize that almost all the aspects of popular well-being theories are in there. So if you then, so it's huge potential for learning and growth and well-being. And I did ask Robert if he still stands by that quote, because a lot of his views have changed. He still does. He did want me to mention dentists. I'm not quite sure why. But he said coaching is the natural choice for being the applied arm of positive psychology, and I do believe that. It's not the only arm to apply what we know from positive psychology, but it's ideal. So I knew that coaching is a fantastic tool to make the most out of the potential that this offers for learning and growth and insight and creativity. So nobody has looked into this. I mentioned there's some research into well-being, there's some research into spirituality and transcendence, some research into non-clinical populations. So that's growing. The Roland Griffith Research Fund has received 20 million in funding. Positive psychologist David Yaden from UPenn recently got nominated professor chair professor of that research arm into secular spirituality and well-being. So there's more research coming, but we need to apply the research. And people will apply the research. I don't think we can. I mean, we can wait 10 years until we have solid findings and make sense of how coaching and psychedelics can make sense together. But I know that people are already applying this. And there's a lot of people that are applying this, most of them well-intentioned, many of them don't really know what they're doing. So there's a huge overlap that I found. The data is surprisingly scarce on why people come to coaching and what do they want out of coaching. But at least there's some good data. Why do people seek psychedelic experiences? Data is a lot more scarce. But the data that we did find, and again, I'm not going to show you the details. We did write a paper on it, which I'll share at the end. There's a lot of overlap into why people come to coaching and what people get out of psychedelics. So I figured that can be a really good foundation into inspiring more research. So how can this be done? I see coaching as a fantastic way to help people prepare, set intentions, figure out why psychedelics, why now, how are you going to keep yourself safe, what are your intentions, what are your goals. This is not going to the forest and tripping with your friends and having an experience. This is about putting some eye shades on and really going inside. Try to avoid the distractions that come in and just give you a good time. The music, if there is any, very carefully selected, not to be too guiding or leading. But there's a lot of ways in this can be done, and it can be quite a wild west. Right? So during the experience, I don't think there should be any coaching. Most therapists agree there shouldn't be any work done while somebody's in an incredibly vulnerable state, where all these connections are gone, and you're just, having sometimes a very weird, sometimes incredibly difficult, sometimes a horrendously painful experience, depending on your mindset and the environment in which you're in. So what happens during the experience happens during the experience. Part of the preparation coaching, I want to open up a space to talk about who's going to sit with you, how experienced they are, what kind of questions could you ask them, where could you learn more about what you're getting yourself into. And these are important questions, and there's many ways in which we can coach. Personally, I don't want to offer solutions and guidance. I have a lot of conversations with coaches in this space. They're quite happy to offer some teaching. They're quite happy to share some of the research from clinical trials. They're quite happy to work with a structure of how to guide someone through the preparation stage. I think it's a decision that every practitioner has to take for themselves. Generally, the more guidance and the more teaching, the more advice you offer, the more responsibility you take. And I don't want to take a lot of responsibility. I want to take the responsibility to hold the space so that that person that comes to me can make their own decisions. And they need to have made the decision to do this. I don't want to talk anybody into this. So part of me feels quite bold in even talking about this, because it can feel, there's a lot of enthusiasm about the potential results. So take it with a bit of caution. I'm more on the cautious side, it seems, from within the psychedelic coaching community. There's a lot of people who are very excited to even hold space and sit through the experience. But during the experience, I wouldn't do any coaching, would stay very far away from it. What's crucial is the integration stage. Because I've seen a lot of people had an amazing experience, huge revelations, huge insights, very meaningful, sometimes very confusing, and then 3 weeks later, everything is back. I go back to work, and nobody understands what they went through, comparably to telling somebody a dream that you found really meaningful, and nobody has any frame of reference of what the hell that means for you. So working at least a couple of sessions to make sense of what you have experienced can really turn a very difficult, challenging experience into a very constructive one. It can turn something that could have just been a bit of fun and really take it and make it meaningful and make it last. How are you going to show up now in your life as something seems to have radically shifted in you? Rather than just quit your job and start your own ceremonies, hold on, like how would that work? And what do you want to do? And why? And how are you going to show up in your relationships now? Now that you feel you're different and something has shifted. Other people are maybe not so on board with you changing. So a huge factor in maintaining any form of change is the environment that you go into. And there's a lot of work to be done to integrate this meaningfully and take a systemic view into that kind of work. So integration is huge. And whether you can, that experience, by the way, doesn't need to be psychedelic to work in this way. I was somewhat disappointed that the coaching work I do wasn't actually that different when I worked with psychedelics than any other experience. Somebody might have experienced tremendous criticism at work, or losing a job, or any meaningful experience. Well, you can prepare for moving jobs, or moving country, or moving relationships, and then you have that experience, and then you integrate it. The processes in terms of coaching, I don't find very different. Many coaches do work with structured programs and protocols and methodologies. I guess I'm a bit too existential for that. But we can scale this, right? So there can be many different ways in which we work with this. So we're still in the very early days. I think we can use a lot of what we know about coaching and apply it here as well. But that kind of implies that we need to know something about coaching, and most of the coaches who work in the psychedelic field, they don't really know what coaching is. Many, like, we have 16 episodes into a podcast talking about coaching and psychedelics, and more than half never read a book on coaching, never done any formal training. They come from the psychedelic community, and they do whatever they think coaching is. You know, many of them do fantastic work, but I find that a bit concerning. Under the heading of coaching, a lot of things happen that you can call all sorts of things, from mentoring, consulting, to outright therapy for people that don't really want to spend 8 years to become a therapist, and now they call themselves therapeutic coaches, and they work with childhood trauma and psychedelic experiences. So that's concerning. So huge ethical implications, a whole range of them, and I think it's important to have this conversation over ground. Because I was somewhat disillusioned. I created a lot of spaces over the last couple of years for coaches to come together and talk about these things. And we had a lot of initial interest, but from coaches who are relatively new to coaching, who had not heard of psychedelics or had considered their work, lots of interest, lots of curiosity. But the coaches who are actively practicing, they seem to be hesitant to really show up and share best practice. So I was in a session earlier on community of practice. I would really like to build more of a community of practice around this. That's why I think it's important we have those conversations and we challenge each other and we allow ourselves to be challenged. And that can be difficult for people who are doing the work and they believe it's right. It's uncomfortable to challenge your ideas by how other people practice, especially since coaching is such a huge range of what it can be. I like coaching because of the lack of regulation, and I also am concerned because of the lack of regulation. The lack of regulation allows people who are really good at holding space to hold space for people, and it really helps. And I think if someone has that quality, that way of being with them, then I think they should do good work, and we should allow them to do good work. I'm not a fan of the gatekeeping institutions that are just allowing only a certain kind of person to come into that space. At the same time, especially when we throw psychedelics into the mix, the potential is supersized, the concern as well. So I think it's important that we understand a bit about the unconscious and how that works, about projections and transference and parallel processes. Because these things are going to show up. And if we're careful about not working with people while they're on an experience, but to prepare and to integrate, and we kind of get a sense for when my range of competency ends and when I need to refer to appropriate mental health professional, then I don't have any issue with somebody not having the qualification. Because I think everybody needs to frame their space in the huge helping by talking universe. And as long as you contract that well and you communicate it well, to a point where your clients can give you informed consent whether to work with you or not on that basis, then I'm okay. Ethically, morally, that's fine. Legally, it's another matter. So legally is a good point to talk about as well, because you can have legal experiences in the Netherlands, for example, many legal retreat centers. Costa Rica, soon to be in the US, many states, a couple of states already decriminalized it. So Vancouver, exactly. Australia has had recently, just very recently, psychedelic therapy is a thing now. It's being done. This is great. So coaching is going to happen. So the question is, what do we really need? But legally, you can have conversations. I think it's important to have conversations, and I hope the stigma of talking about something that in some countries is considered illegal, but you did have the experience, whether that was a legal experience or not, I'd much rather have someone had an illegal experience, if that's even a thing. It's a bit weird. It's an experience, right? But an experience with an illegal substance, or a substance that's illegal in the country that you happen to be in for whatever reason, I'd much rather have them come to me for coaching and make sense of that and draw something from it than never talking about it or talking to people that don't really have any frame of reference for it and they just try to give you some good advice that's not going to be helpful. So conversations aren't illegal. I don't want to tell people, go do, source it somewhere and have an experience. I'm very clear in look for a legal retreat center. I won't tell you about any specific ones because I think you need to check that out and make decisions for yourself. Take responsibility for the decisions that you make. So there's many more. I'll stop there. Feel free to continue the conversation. I think it's important because we grow through these conversations. So a couple of things I want to turn your attention to. I did mention that paper. We just got the go-ahead from Elaine Cox to submit to the International Journal of Evidence-Based Coaching and Mentoring. So we need to do a little bit of tweaking on word count. But we're nearly there, so that's to be, I reckon it'll take until 2024. I'm not sure who's going to review it or how long that process will take, but it's coming. If anybody wants access to a draft, maybe for some feedback, I'm sure we can do something. I mentioned the podcast, so there's a lot of long form. Sometimes these conversations are 2.5 hours long. We really dig into the people that are already practicing in this field. These are the thought leaders that are out in the open. They're happy to talk about how they do things. I'm quite critical in nature, so I really dig into their approach. That's a huge resource for people who want to explore this more. I did invite 2 psychedelic integration coaches into my coaching lab, so if you want to see it in action, we have those recorded and they're available to our members. We do have an interest group that I would like now to rebrand as a community of practice. We do have a Facebook group with about 300 or 400 people in it and very little conversation. So go figure. I tried. I'm a bit tired of trying. I have a 1.5-year-old. There's a lot of other things I'm doing. So this is not a significant part of my work. It's we don't have funding for this research, so it's a labor of love, and I hope that we can bring more people in it to insert some energy into it. Facebook is not a fantastic place to have these conversations, but I figured if I have a different platform hosted elsewhere, it's going to be even harder to bring people into it. So if anybody wants to take a lead on bringing people together, some of you have Woo and Connector and others, the character strengths to bring people together, please do. I'm quite an introvert, believe it or not. We do have a mailing list where I relatively sporadically just share, I do share the podcast on there, and I sporadically share news when I feel called to, or I find some time between changing nappies and learning the meaning of no. I did mention the slides, so if you take a picture of that or you type that in, you can download these slides. I'll take a moment for you to take a picture. And that's me, so happy to have private conversations, either here, find me, or via email, or in any other way.
You have some older people.
Stay.
We have to verify that we're human.
Yeah, We'll have time at the end where we can ask you questions and put his slides back up so you can grab that.
Okay, so this is my personal mailing list. If you want to contact me, I do run some other stuff. So thank you very much.